Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports, and today we're covering the Dallas Mavericks in a comprehensive trade guide. December 15th is one of the most important dates in the NBA every single year. That is the date this year that 89% of players in the NBA become tradable. Right now, the number is right around 70%. That number jumps up nearly 20%, which opens the door for a lot of potential trades and a lot of avenues for teams to improve. If you guys are excited for that, make sure to leave a like on today's video and also subscribe to the channel for more content. We're going to be covering all 30 NBA teams, hopefully. We've already hit the Detroit Pistons. Now we're covering the Dallas Mavericks, and we've got 28 more teams to cover as well that we're going to be covering in the next coming days and weeks. So let's get into it here with Dallas. What are the Mavericks going to look to do? Well, first, they need to evaluate themselves. We're going to look at their tradable players, their contract situations. That's really the most important thing when it comes to trades. You need to know what you have on the table to offer. Trades, it takes two to tango, and you need to have at least some valuable assets that you can put in the door, whether that's either players or draft assets. And the Mavericks right now, they're in an interesting spot in both of those regards. The draft pick situation, like I said, for Dallas, again, very interesting. There are some limitations right now that will be changing in the next couple of months. So very important to note for that. The long-term cap space for Dallas, they're in an interesting spot for that as well. Right now, Dallas is kind of in a weird spot. Nico Harrison's got a lot to work through. So we're going to see how well he does doing that. Will the Mavericks be a buyer or seller? I think that one's pretty obvious here for this team. For the most part, everyone's going to have a pretty good understanding of where some of these teams are. Now, there's going to be some surprise ones. Last year, Dallas kind of operated a little bit more as a quote-unquote seller, trading off of Kristaps Porzingis. I would more so call that repositioning, and I think Dallas might be in line to do that again this year. And then you look at projected activity level. What do I see from this team? How active will they be? I think that's really one of the most important things, and we'll also talk about which teams they could potentially trade with as we get through it. So let's jump into it right away now here. Tradable players, and I think for Dallas, it's weird because some teams have a ton of depth and they can afford to make a bunch of trades. Like you look at the Los Angeles Clippers, they're about 13, 14 deep of guys who I think have serious trade value. The Mavericks, I don't believe that's true. Right now, I've got 7 guys who I would consider tradable, and 7 of these guys are in their top 9 rotation. The 2 guys that you don't see pictured here, Luka Doncic, who is someone they will not trade under any circumstance right now, and then also Josh Green, who I think is having a really nice jump in year 3 of his career, and I don't envision him being a part of a trade unless it was a bigger trade. We're going to talk about why Dallas is not going to make a bigger trade this season, especially at the trade deadline. So let's get into it. Spencer Dinwiddie, 2 years, $41 million. His contract next year is non-guaranteed. So you could look at it as an expiring. Based on how he's played, though, the Mavs would like to keep him around. I don't see Dinwiddie really going anywhere. Tim Hardaway Jr., he's been playing really well as of late at the time I record this video. Now, if you're watching this a few weeks after, who knows how he's been playing, right? A little up and down in the last year and a half or so. Some really high moments, but that contract de-escalates. It actually gets less and less in terms of money stipulation on that term for Tim Hardaway. So it's a really good contract to actually hold on to, in my opinion. 2 years from now, he'll be making about $15 million, which is essentially nothing when it comes to NBA role player money. That might be mid-level exception type of money. So definitely a good contract to keep Tim Hardaway Jr. on. Davis Bertans, though, that contract's a nightmare for somebody who just does not really play that much. It's really hard to envision another player in their top 9. Excuse me, Dorian Finney-Smith. I don't want to, I completely forgot to mention him. He's obviously one of the players that I just don't see any way that the Mavs would trade. But Davis Bertans here as well, 3 years, $49 million, non-guaranteed in that final year. Basically going into next year, every team is going to look at that as an expiring deal. Christian Wood isn't expiring, as is Dwight Powell. These are 2 guys who, right now, if they didn't have in their front court, it would be really, really abysmal play from the 4 or 5 position. Powell, for me, I also don't have Maxi Kleber listed here. So there's players on this team that I don't have listed as tradable. They're not going to trade Kleber. But for Christian Wood, Dwight Powell, those are 2 guys. I just don't think that they can afford to trade Wood after giving up a first rounder this past year for him. And then for Dwight Powell, the only way they would trade him is if they had something pretty significant coming back in the door. Right now, he's the starting center for Dallas. So if they made a move for another big, that's the only way Dwight Powell could be on his way out. But I'm a little skeptical on the likelihood of that. Reggie Bullock, 2 years left, one of them being this year. So next year is a non-guaranteed year. Now, I would be surprised if he's not a Maverick next season. I would be really shocked. And then JaVale McGee signed on the taxpayer mid-level this past year, around $5.5 to $6 million a year. He's got 2 years left and then a player option. So I basically count it as 3 years. He's going to be on this team for the next couple of seasons for sure, unless they trade him. That contract's pretty nice to add into deals. If you're, $3 to $7 million apart, based on the 125% rule, JaVale McGee's contract can fill that. Now, the issue is you're going to want a team to look at that and say, well, that's not a big negative, because honestly, with how he struggled to start the year, I kind of was hopeful that his rim protection and size and rebounding was going to be what Dallas needed. It just hasn't played out that well. JaVale McGee, even in the spot minutes that they were planning on giving him, just hasn't looked as good as I thought he could have. And I think Dallas is a little disappointed by it as well. So JaVale, unfortunately, not going to work out, and probably would have to be packaged with like a second-round pick to even get off the contract at this point. So you look at this and you're saying, okay, what's really tradable here if you're not going to give up Dorian Finney-Smith, Luka, Josh Green, and Maxi Kleber? And there's not really a lot from Dallas's perspective to give up unless they're getting something big back. And the issue with that is their draft pick situation really doesn't allow that right now. They owe a 2023 first to New York, which you might say, oh, well, that's this year. That's not a big deal. Yes, but also no. On that trade, there were backup protections through 2025. So as of today, the day I'm recording it, the Mavs cannot trade a first-round pick until 2027 unless they were to amend the original deal with New York, which could cost them an extra second-round pick or some other type of asset to do something like that. And what I mean by that is they would have to call New York and say, hey, we owe you this protected pick this year. There's backup protections on it. How about we just turn this pick to fully unprotected this season? And the Knicks would say, okay, we can help you out with that, because that's really what they would be doing, is helping the Mavericks gain more flexibility again. The issue with that, though, is the Knicks would say, what else are you going to give us? And that's where that second round pick kind of comes into fruition here. The Knicks would want to add another asset, even if it's a low level asset. That's just kind of the expectation if you were to do something like that. And by the way, the Mavs did win the trade with the Knicks. And if you disagree, right now the Knicks don't have any players on their roster from that trade. So that's really the reality of it here. Even if Porzingis didn't work out as well in Dallas as many would have hoped, Tim Hardaway Jr. is still there. And the Knicks landed Dennis Smith Jr., DeAndre Jordan, and Wes Matthews in that deal. So that obviously did not work out well for New York. Let's get into the next one here, though. We're talking about long-term cap space. Sometimes some teams would like to make trades to open up cap space for themselves. It gives them avenues to improve in different ways. For example, the Portland Trail Blazers last year traded away CJ McCollum and Larry Nance in a deal that gave them a big trade exception. That trade exception ended up fitting in a guy named Jeremy Grant, who's been playing really well for them this year. However, the Mavericks, I just can't see that being really the realm or the pathway that they take, because right now their projected cap space this offseason will be negative $43 million. So they would have to essentially offload $70 to $75 million of cap space this year to open up any money for the offseason, which is a really tough thing to do, especially when you have a player like Luka Doncic on your roster, because you don't want to waste a year of having him on your team when he's such a good player. And the other issue with this, and this goes back a couple of seasons ago, before Luka's Supermax hit in, I told him, I said on YouTube here, I said, the Mavs have to go out and spend money. And I wanted them to spend money on DeMar DeRozan. I did. You can go back to those videos in free agency where I said, I really want the Mavs to get DeRozan. I really wanted it. This is before he got All NBA again with Chicago. I thought he was going to be the perfect fit next to Luka and Porzingis. Would have been really good in solving the issue of another shot creator on the team. And they failed to do that. They opted for Reggie Bullock instead, and Sterling Brown. I wouldn't say that those were smart decisions. Things have worked out for them because Luke is as good as he is. But now that his max contract has hit in, it's a lot harder to have cap space. So the moves won't be cap space inspired this year. It just can't be. Unless they went the 2019 route again, which I'm just begging the front office, please don't do that. And then for those who don't know what the 2019 route was, that was where the Mavs traded all of their starters away. Besides Luka Doncic that year, they traded Dennis Smith Jr., Wesley Matthews, DeAndre Jordan, Harrison Barnes, and they came away with really the only guy who played that year was Trey Burke and Tim Hardaway Jr. because Porzingis was out, and they got Justin Jackson, who was a disaster. So really they can't go that route. I just don't think that that's a smart thing to do when you have Luke on your roster. Every single move matters, and right now you don't have time to mess around and screw up. And I think that Nico Harrison has been on the borderline of that a couple of times. I think missing on the DeRozan opportunity is a great example of that. But it's not all lost here. Are they going to be a buyer or seller this year? I think that their position would be definite buyer, but potentially I could see them reposition like we talked about earlier, where last year they shifted their team away from Porzingis and Luka as the 1-2 punch and opted to go get another ball handler in Spencer Dinwiddie. And they had to mortgage some money doing that. They had to take in a guy like Davis Bertans, who can't say was a smart move for them, but it was a move. And I could see them reposition again this year, making a couple moves if that means Dwight Powell out the door, if that means someone like Christian Wood out the door. I could see that. Now, it doesn't mean that's what I think they should do, but I could see them operating that way. Nico Harrison, his first year at the trade deadline as the decision maker there in Dallas, was not gun shy. He pulled the trigger on the Porzingis deal an hour before the trade deadline expired, and well, the rest is history. So will he do that again this year? Potentially. I could see that. But at the same time, I don't know if it's super wise for them. I do like this roster that they have in place for the most part. There are some flaws. We'll see if Kemba Walker really does fill in that tertiary ball handler role. For me, I'd be more positive about Jaden Hardy filling that role, honestly, at this point. But Jason Kidd seems a little bit gun shy to let him get consistent minutes in the NBA. So, he's been playing really well for the Texas Legends. So we don't have to rush him into anything, but I think he's a better third option than Kemba Walker at this point, just defensively and in terms of health. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. So let's get into some potential teams that the Mavs could talk trades with. The Detroit Pistons, I already talked about them in a video. Saddiq Bey is a name that's come up a couple of times. And for Dallas, the reason Saddiq Bey makes a lot of sense, he's kind of the archetype you're looking for. He's a player who's a cold starter to begin years, and then he always ends the season hot. So if you buy on Saddiq Bey right now, you might be getting better value than he's currently played up to this point this season. And he's somebody who, if you consider what Saddiq Bey could do for you long term, he's one of those complementary 3-and-D players. And the issue with Dallas right now, a good amount of their roster is actually over the age of 27, and Luka Doncic is 23. There's a pretty significant gap between most of their roster and Luka in terms of age disparity, which is not something you typically expect because, guys like Dorian Finney-Smith, who took a little bit longer to get going in the league, they're lesser known, and they're more known for recent activity. So you would think, hey, these guys are young. They're really not. This team is not that young. Saddiq Bey would get them quite a bit younger, and he would be someone who would fill in their rotation for sure. And then the Mavs young pieces you would look at and say, okay, Luka, Josh Green, Saddiq Bey, Jaden Hardy, and that's kind of what you've got there, which could make some sense. Now, if you went to Washington and talk trades with them, you could get a young player in Denny Avdia, a young-ish player in Daniel Gafford, and then Kyle Kuzma is already 27 himself, but he's somebody who I think could stylistically fit what Dallas needs, another guy who's capable of handling the basketball. Now, he does it at the 4-man spot, which is a little interesting, and Jason Kidd's lack of willingness to play Christian Wood extreme amount of minutes makes me believe that he wouldn't want to do the same thing with Kyle Kuzma, but I could see any of those three players helping. Gafford gives them the athletic bounce and rim protection that they're looking for, although he does have some of his own faults in terms of defensive rebounding and consistent positioning. Denny Avdia is really the player here that's most intriguing to me, somebody who fits the Luka Doncic timeline in terms of long-term approach, but is also a capable player right now. Definitely a good defensive player who I think he's best suited when there is a rim protector on the floor. It lets him take advantage of some of his aggression out on the perimeter defensively, but I think he's a solid option for sure. Then Chicago. The Bulls right now have not been playing super well at the time I'm recording this. They're 10-14. Not brutal, but not as good as they would hope, obviously. DeMar DeRozan's not getting any younger. So if the Mavs are looking to make a push for this year and next season, DeRozan's the guy that makes a lot of sense for that. Otherwise, you go with Texas A&M legend Alex Caruso, who he's not super young himself, but he's younger. He's a younger option than DeRozan, and somebody who I could see being a Maverick for the next 4, 5, 6 years if things go right. And he's kind of the player you're really needing in Dallas, in my opinion. A guy who he makes plays when he gets the ball, but he's very accustomed to playing off of it. He's had a lot of success in his career playing next to guys like DeRozan and LeBron and Levine and Anthony Davis. And the Mavs have one of those in Luka Doncic, a high-usage player who deserves to have the ball in his hands. And Caruso's a defensive playmaker who I think would really improve this team. Now, DeRozan, he's going to cost a little bit more than Caruso will, just based on, how they've both played recently. Caruso is still, I think, a really valuable player in this league, though, and one of the more underrated guys in this league. Orlando, the Magic, right now, you look at what they've drafted. Franz Wagner, Paulo Banchero, they have also made the acquisition of Bol Bol in the last 12 months, and all of those things are looking really good for them, which maybe opens the door to Jonathan Isaac becoming expendable there, especially given the fact that he has not played since the bubble. And I just don't think that they're really counting on him being a long-term part of their future, specifically with the fact that his contract right now maybe is perceived as a net negative. This could really be something where we see the Mavericks look to flip Davis Bertans and a couple second-round picks to Orlando for Jonathan Isaac. And for Orlando's perspective, Bertans' contract's 1 year shorter if you count the non-guaranteed year as basically non-existent. And it would open the door for Orlando to open up cap space a little bit quicker than they're currently slated to do that, which could be important before Franz Wagner and Paulo Banchero extensions set in a few years. So could give Orlando a little bit of wiggle room in terms of an extra offseason to go out and make a big splash. If they find a way to do that, they could still have a top pick this year, add in a couple seconds to give you a little bit more flexibility in future trades. I think that's a good option for sure for them. The Utah Jazz, a team that they've started out really hot this year. Things have cooled off since Mike Conley got injured. He is slated to return, though. And just with how they've been playing as of late, I wouldn't be shocked if they do decide to move 1 or 2 or even 3 of their guys. 3 guys that I think would fit Dallas really well, all in different ways. Mike Conley, for him, he would come in and kind of fill that Jalen Brunson role. We would probably move Dinwiddie back to the bench, and it would kind of play like last year. I think Conley is worse than Brunson, but they're at different stages of their career. Conley would be a nice calming presence into the starting lineup, and somebody who I think could take a little bit more of that pressure off of Luka Doncic on a night-to-night basis in the regular season. Jordan Clarkson probably would fill into the Dinwiddie role from last year, and Dinwiddie would be the Brunson this year in a way. So you'd be trading for a bench scorer, which I think would make some sense. Now, we've seen Clarkson take a bigger role in Utah this year, done more playmaking. He's definitely excelled in that role in some ways. He's also ready to square up with whoever, whenever, at any moment. So that's a big W if the Mavs could get him and, get a bodyguard for Luka in a way. And then Malik Beasley, a completely different player than those guys, both Conley and Clarkson, because he's really an elite movement shooter. He shoots about 70 to 75% of his shots are three-pointers, and a good amount of them are on the move. He's not really afraid of any contests. And he'd be exactly what the Mavs kind of were hoping Bertans would be for them, honestly. And he shoots it at a much better clip. He's one of the better three-point shooters in the NBA. I don't think that Malik Beasley gets enough love, honestly. Yes, he has his pitfalls. He's not the best defender. But when he is locked in and engaged, he is a timely playmaker on that end of the floor. So Malik Beasley, I think, could be a nice answer for Dallas as a bench piece. Maybe a 6th, 7th guy coming off, and you get him in and you get him, 2 or 3 3-point looks and probably knock down 1 or 2 of those. And if you do, you're feeling pretty good about what he's contributing off the bench. And then the big one here, Indiana. If the Pacers do decide to sell right now, they're not really in a position where they should. But let's say things start to sour on them a little bit before the trade deadline and they say, hey, let's wrap it up this year. Maybe Halliburton's going to miss some time with a bruised hip, kind of going Oklahoma City style for the end of the season. Well, Myles Turner could be expendable for them. Now, he's going to turn 27. He's not as young as I think a lot of people would perceive, but he's not as old as others who, have been around the NBA would perceive, right? This is his 8th year in the league and he's about to turn 27. Shows how young of a player he really was when he came in, and he's grown a lot in that time as well. He's a very, very good big man. I think specifically would help a lot against a matchup against Denver in the postseason, because Myles Turner's had some really nice performances against Nikola Jokic in the past. One game this year, he really forced Nikola Jokic into a tough performance. The Nuggets ended up coming back and winning that game anyway. The Nuggets are clearly a better team than Indiana, but I think Myles Turner really would bring a lot of positives to Dallas, especially since he is a Texas guy. He would be very well received back into Dallas, and a player that I think would really fit this roster, whether that means Christian Wood's there or not, whether Dwight Powell's there or not. I think Turner gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of the way you can run your offense and your defense, which is really what you're looking for to the big man position these days. You need flexibility. You need guys who can execute multiple systems, both on offense and defense. And I think Myles Turner, probably the best available option, honestly, this trade deadline. Now, the projected activity level. For me, I think it's mild. I think the Mavericks look to make 1, maybe 2 moves this year, but they're not going to be big ones. I think the biggest potential move would be Myles Turner. I think that's a stretch, though. I don't think it's super likely. I think other teams out in the marketplace are going to be a little bit more aggressive than Dallas, and I think there's good reason for that. The Mavericks, if they just wait past this NBA draft, after that pick conveys to the New York Knicks, they will have their 2024 first, 2026 first, 2028 first, and 2030 first round pick, all unprotected, available on the table for any star player out in the marketplace. So, if Bradley Beal becomes available, or, player XYZ, right? We see it every year. Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell, all these players end up becoming available that no one was really expecting. We did expect those Utah players a little bit more, but I hope my point's received here. Players become available, and Dallas could be in a spot where they have the leverage to go get one. Now, there's going to be other teams competing in that regard too. The New York Knicks, one example of that. There's a bunch of teams right now. Oklahoma City has all the picks the next decade. It feels like Houston's got a good amount of picks. New Orleans has a ton of picks as well from both their Drew Holiday trade and their Anthony Davis trade. So there's teams in better positions than Dallas to go get a star. But I think the Mavericks are one of the more star-needy teams, and they might have, a lot more aggression in going out and getting a guy, even if that means they overpay a little bit. The nice thing is if you have Luka, you can afford to overpay because you get another good star player next to him. And chances are you're a top 2 team in the West. They already proved that last year that they could be one of those teams getting to the Western Conference Finals. But I just don't know if this roster is quite there still at this point, especially losing Jalen Brunson. I think Jalen Brunson is a little overrated, to be honest, for what he did for Dallas last year. Yes, he had some really clutch performances in the postseason, but quite frankly, Spencer Dinwiddie's giving you a good amount of what Brunson did last year. So I don't think that the Mavericks are significantly worse than last year. I just think this Western Conference is a little bit tougher, especially if teams stay healthy. The Nuggets, Clippers, 2 examples of that. The Wolves, I think, are a better team this year on paper, especially if they can, get some of their rhythm going. It seems like they've played pretty well with Cat out of the lineup, actually, which I guess isn't a big surprise because Cat's one of the worst defenders in the league. But my point here is the Mavs are a team that they can be patient because Luka's 23 years old. You don't need to make the wrong move now in a hasty decision instead of just waiting and making the right move, even if it takes an extra 6 months to get there. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. Let me know what you think the Mavs will do in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching. Again, go check out some of the other videos on the channel. Leave a like on this one if you did enjoy. There's a lot of work that goes in off camera for this type of video, a lot of research, making sure I'm prepared to talk about this team. Obviously, as a Mavs fan, it's pretty easy for me to get on camera and talk about Dallas. But for the other 29 teams, I do a lot of research to make sure I'm ready. I watched a lot of games to make sure I know what I'm talking about. So hopefully you guys do enjoy. Subscribe for more content like this, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.